Hi, shalom, friends. Those of us that are privileged to have children have noticed a very interesting phenomenon. Kids have a favorite story. And sometimes every night they hear the same story. They know the words by heart. Sometimes you make a mistake and they correct you, and yet they love hearing that story. I'm not sure why, but somehow that ability to be fascinated and to be comforted by a story, many of us seem to have lost that upon maturity, with, of course, the notable exception of Bible stories, of the stories of the Chumash. It never ceases to amaze us, uplift us, console us, challenge us, the stories of the Chumash. We must have heard it thousands and thousands of times. And in particular, those of us that are following the Jewish calendar, this week we begin the story of the birth of Moshe, the initial slavery of the Jewish people, the saga of Moshe's departure, and ultimately his return to Egypt. And it's just wonderful. There's one particular aspect that I'd like to emphasize in today's YouTube. When we take a look at history, there's a sense of incremental change. Sometimes you could see, for example, a change of a regime. So in retrospect, we look back and we see, oh, here there was a protest, and here there was a revolution, and here there were flaws in the government, and here there was a scandal. Perhaps the dictator was getting older or more senile. And then in retrospect, we say, it was coming. We couldn't predict it happening now, but now that it happened, we look back and we could see it happening. But in the first story of redemption, we actually cannot see any of that. So let me take you back in time for a moment, okay? There's a family called Hebrews, and they come to Egypt, and they're a small group, actually 70 people, but they're related to the ruler, Joseph, and he gives them a parcel of land, and essentially they live isolated from the people. None of the brothers of Joseph go into high society. As a matter of fact, from the tradition, they presented themselves as shepherds, and shepherding in Egypt was not considered a very, very fine or special type of a job. I guess you could call it a low-paying job, menial. Okay. After the death of Joseph, what would have happened with this family? The answer is nothing. It would have just disappeared. Either they would have gone back to their homeland, or more likely, they would have assimilated 70 people in a nation of perhaps 1 million or more, certainly hundreds of thousands. By what right would they have to have been kept separate? Yet we find they stay separate. There's almost like an elitist feeling amongst them, and they begin to populate. And we notice, again, the relationship of the people of the land to this family of the Hebrews. Usually, the first generation, second generation, maybe third generation of immigrants have to deal with the stigma of being immigrants. Perhaps their language is not as cultured, they don't share the same values, the same food, they still remember the cooking back home. But when you're in a country for 100 years, can you truly say that we're still immigrants? If you're in a country for 200 years, can you say you're immigrants? By this time, you're probably indistinguishable. So if we were to look at the family of the Hebrews, which we all come from, Jewish people, going to Egypt, we would say what an interesting story that they come to Egypt, and we would expect them, after the death of Yosef, as I mentioned a minute ago, either to assimilate or to leave. Yet they grow strong, they grow powerful, and the people, instead of embracing them, say, you know what, they're honored guests, we should tolerate them. As time progresses, they're not anymore honored guests, they're just guests. And as time continues, they suddenly become not guests anymore, but interlopers, and people begin to resent them. Now, you have to remember, during this time, no one is forcing the Hebrews to stay in Egypt. Could it be they were so blind that they didn't feel what people were thinking or feeling about them? Were they that deluded? And yet, there's no mention in the Bible how the Hebrews were feeling. And then, eventually, this resentment turns into an activity. We have to plot, we have to protect ourselves against these people. And ultimately, these people become slaves, and their value as slaves is also minimized, because we find them being literally worked to death until it comes to the climax of the male babies should be thrown into the Nile River. Why would you want to destroy a potential source of slaves? Now, I just presented to you one particular perspective, just a slice. You could present this in a completely different way as well. So the story opens up. Moses is being born at a time when, though it seems to me, as a modern person, incomprehensible of how an entire clan, nation, tribe, people are enslaved, and it seems to be going downwards. He is born at the nadir of existence. Things could not get better. As a matter of fact, Moses himself is only saved miraculously. Otherwise, he would have been another victim, another casualty, another unknown of a baby that was abandoned or thrown into the Nile. Okay? At this time, do we know anything about Egypt? Well, we just have hints. And the hint is that Egypt was a superpower. We get this hint from the past, that there was a famine all in the surrounding countries. Only Egypt became the breadbasket of the area, to the extent that the people of the land gave their money to Pharaoh, their land was mortgaged, and they felt themselves completely servants to Pharaoh. So we have a mighty empire, and we have a strong, very strong leader, and things seem to be getting stronger and more rewarding for Egypt, and less hope for these downtrodden slaves. And now we come to what I want to share with you. Moses comes back to Egypt with a message from God. And he says that the God of the Hebrews, the God of your fathers, has heard you, and he's been reminded of the promise that he made, and he has sent me essentially to take you out of Egypt. Do you think a message like that, if you could put it in contemporary terms, would be heard at all? It wouldn't have been recorded even from a fringe media outlet. If anyone heard him, they would have said, "Meshuggah, crazy, outlandish, ridiculous. Where did this guy come from?" And you know what it says in the Bible? Vaya'amen ha'am. The people believed. And I ask you, just reflect upon this for a minute. A people that is a non-people, slaves, downtrodden, humiliated, no political rights, no human rights, and a message from a God that they haven't heard from in the past, and a message from a man that very few have ever seen or heard. And the rumors were that he was a miracle baby who grew up in the palace and then killed an Egyptian and ran away. And he has this vision of a burning bush. Man, this guy has a wonderful imagination. But he might be a troublemaker and make us suffer. Yet, what does it say? The people believed. And that's my message for you. And it's a reminder to me. Jewish people, the Hebrews of old, the Jews of today, we were born with an innate ability to believe. What a gift. Where people see darkness, we believe there will be light. When people experience bitterness, we believe there'll be a sweetness. Where people see despair, we see an opportunity for change and hope. This concept of believers, the son of believers, is so much part of us that we don't even realize how awesome it is. There's a well-known Hasidic story of a Chassid, a follower of the third Rabbi of Chabad, who was dealing with severe issues of faith. And he was very embarrassed. This takes us back to the mid-1800s. He was living in a religious environment. He himself was a father and a grandfather. And yet, internally, he had doubts. And he decided that he would share it with his teacher and master. And he travels to the Tzemach Tzedek, his holy rabbi, and he says, Rabbi, I have to tell you what's bothering me. I'm embarrassed to say it, but... And the Rabbi listened. And he said, Rebbe, I sometimes doubt that there's God. And the Rebbe listens. And there's no change in his expression. So he said, Rebbe, did you hear what I said? Said the Rebbe looked at him and said, and so what? The chassid was taken aback. So what? I'm a Jew. How could a Jew have that feeling? To which the Rebbe said, you answered your question. If you're a Jew and you're bothered by the possibility of not believing, that itself is a testimony to how firm your belief is. You do believe in God, because if you didn't, why would it bother you that you don't? Or to put it a little bit differently, if you were not convinced of the truthfulness of God's being, then it wouldn't bother you if he wasn't. All what you're really concerned about it is, why don't you feel emotionally what you know deep in your heart? And for that, we could discuss. We, Jewish people, are a nation over 3,300 years, and if we start from from Abraham, over 4,000 years. And we've always had and continue to have a firm belief. There is a God, there is a plan, there is a Torah, there is a reason, and there is a hope for redemption. That hope for redemption is called the Mashiach. Some of you might be smiling and say, well, my father, my grandmother, my great-grandmother had that faith and belief, and he didn't come. And the response would be, you're right, he should have come. It's not that he won't come. The only question will be, what took him so long? Let us take these times of messianic footsteps, literally messianic footsteps, and let's apply it to real-life redemption, to get out of pettiness, and to elevate ourselves from jealousy, and to be a more generous and a kinder type of a human being. And most of all, let's open up our hearts and souls to feel the presence of God, which is waiting and yearning to burst forth. Thank you.